I don't have many nice things to say about Anthem. Despite how cool flying around in a robot suit should be, the nicest thing I could say is how profoundly boring Anthem is to play. And if that's the ceiling for any sort of praise, then the floor might as well just be a giant pit in the ground. I didn't come to Anthem expecting a game with an amazing sense of world building, or deep characters, or even a story that would hook me in. I know a lot of people did, because that's what they expect from BioWare, but I'm not a fan of BioWare in that sense. I don't have that attachment to BioWare that a lot of people seem to have. The only BioWare series that I've even touched has been Mass Effect. My only hopes for Anthem were that it would be a fun loot shooter with mech suits that I could play with my friends. And yet, with those totally normal, reasonable expectations, I am still disappointed beyond belief at what the final product is. The majority of your time in Anthem is spent going out and doing missions. Okay, maybe the majority of your time feels like it's spent in the loading screens, but I'll get to that. Let's just say you're in a mission with your party members, be they your friends or a bunch of randos. You can play solo, but the game seems more tuned towards having a full party, so I mostly stayed away from that option. The mission structure is fairly simple. You head to a location, shoot some things, then you do a thing, whether that thing be stand in a circle while shooting some more things, or collecting small things to put into a bigger thing. Lots of things. Then you rinse and you repeat. There's not a lot of variety here, but that's true of a lot of these types of games, especially in their early days. That doesn't excuse it, but it was something I was prepared for. And because of that, I don't think that's the main problem with Anthem. The lack of variety is only exacerbated by a larger issue with Anthem's structure. The actual problem I have with Anthem's core gameplay loop is twofold. The first is the moment-to-moment combat. It's not bad, it's fine, it's mechanically sound, but that's the problem. It's just fine. If shooting things for loot is what I'm expected to be doing for the majority of my time with Anthem, the combat needs to be more than just fine. The weapons feel like they don't have any weight behind them. There isn't any satisfying feedback after downing an enemy, or hitting an enemy for that matter. Describing game feel is always a weird thing, but those who've played good shooters know what I'm referring to. Firefights in Anthem just don't feel rewarding. They feel like I'm simply going through the motions to get to the next objective and nothing more. They feel like busy work. There's more to your arsenal than just weapons, of course. All the javelins have abilities mapped to their bumpers. I'm playing as the Storm, or Magic Iron Man as I like to call it, so I can only speak to its abilities. The Storm's abilities are all elemental based. Ice shards, lightning bolts, fireballs. These are all cool, but they suffer from the same problem as the weapons. They just don't have that satisfying impact. I find it hard to tell when an enemy has been affected by one of my skills, especially when hovering and attacking from above the action. And it's not because I can't see the results of my actions from that high, but because the results aren't telegraphed well enough. The elemental effects also tie into Anthem's combo system, but again, it's a fairly simple system and not very engaging. It essentially amounts to applying one effect on the enemy and then attacking them with the other. I mostly triggered these combos mindlessly just by alternating my abilities, not by purposefully setting up and chaining certain elemental effects. And then there's the most unique thing this game does, flying in your robot suit. It's cool, and by comparison, maybe the most fun thing to do in the entire game, which is saying something. Because if I find something as basic as moving from point A to point B the most fun thing in your video game, then there's a fundamental problem here. Jumping off a platform and launching your flight boosters is one of the few things that feels satisfying to do in Anthem, but even that comes with a caveat. You gotta make sure not to fly too high because you'll hit the edge of the game world, which is fine, that's not really avoidable. I'm not knocking that. But you also can't fly too far either. If you're not diving through lakes and weaving through waterfalls, you'll overheat, causing you to be grounded until your meter recharges. And if you're too ahead of your party, they'll be forcibly teleported to you, and vice versa. That second one is especially annoying because the distance at which that out of range warning appears feels incredibly small. There were times where I could still see my party member's name in front of me and I would still get the warning that I would be warped ahead in a couple seconds if I didn't catch up. The warning makes even less sense when you consider that party members can be very far from each other when loading into free play. I get wanting to keep your players on the critical mission path, but having such a limited distance in this case is ridiculous. But hey, maybe a lot of these problems fade into the background once I party up with some friends. These kinds of games tend to get lifted up when you ignore the specifics of what's happening and just focus on having a good time chatting with your buddies. So I did that. That didn't help. We were just bored. It was the equivalent of sitting around in the living room with some friends watching whatever was on TV because there was nothing else better to do.
That's it?
Yep, that's it.
Nothing happened.
Nothing happened.
Sorry.
Anthem! Now remember, I did say the root of Anthem's problems was twofold. All of that was problem number 1 with the gameplay loop. Problem number 2 is a design choice surrounding the mission structure that I find to be utterly baffling and frustrating. I mentioned earlier how it may feel like most of your time in Anthem is spent watching a loading screen. Well, that's because to do nearly anything related to Anthem's core mechanics, you need to sit through a load. Picking a mission, sit through a load. Finish a mission, sit through a load. Check and equip your loot, sit through a load. The fact that I am sent back to Fort Tarsis, the story hub, after every mission is downright insane. It completely kills any drive I had to want to do another mission knowing I have to go through unintuitive mission select menus and multiple loads every time. Why can't I trigger another mission by flying to another location on the map? I should be able to do all the missions I have available to me while I'm out and about in the world and then cast them in all at once on my return trip to the fort. I should also be able to switch my gear out on the fly. This is a loot game where you can't actually do anything with your loot until you finish a mission and sit through a load. At that point, why make them item drops from defeated enemies? Might as well just make them mission rewards. Those 2 changes would eliminate like half the loads you would experience, maybe even more depending on how many missions you have available to you at the time. Doing 3 missions with the current structure, equipping new loot after each one, would take you 12 loads. Yes, 12. I counted. I checked. Now let's turn this into a hypothetical scenario with a change structure. If you could access your inventory at any time and you could do those same 3 missions in one session, even if it still took a load to trigger the mission itself once you've arrived at its marker in the world, it would instead take 4 loads. Not that I would actually want to spend a lot of time out in that world anyway. If I could describe the world of Anthem in one word, it would be uninspired. It's just one large jungle-like area with some cliffs and some lakes. It's very pretty, but there's nothing really distinct about it. I couldn't tell you the difference between one named area and the other. I can't even remember the names themselves. The experience doesn't get much better once you load into Fort Tarsis either. This is where you meet your chatty NPCs and get the bulk of your world building. If the style of the outside world wasn't doing it for me, then maybe I would find some substance in the narrative hub. Unfortunately, that's not the case. I'm trying to put this next bit in more eloquent terms, but I'm just gonna say it as plainly as it comes to mind. Anthem's characters suck ass. And not the good kind of ass either, not like the Interceptor Javelin's ass. I mean, look at that, that's a good robot ass. But the characters, they suck some swamp ass. Anthem's characters are less like fully realized people and more like characters designed around a specific trait. Everyone is so quirky, and I don't mean that as a compliment. It's as if they're trying really hard to be unique. I actively dislike talking to the majority of these people. The one exception is Yarrow. He actually seems like a cool dude who has gone through some shit. Everyone else fades away into the background. There's also something physically about the characters that just feel off. It's not the character models themselves because they look pretty good, but maybe more in the way they animate or how their lines are delivered. A lot of it just feels stilted or just plain unnatural. I know I talk with my hands a lot, but even I don't move like this.
The anthem of creation is hard to find the line between superstition and science.
In addition to these major blunt trauma blows, Anthem is also suffering death from 1,000 cuts. There are a multitude of small things that make everything feel worse than it already is. Things like the slow walking speed in Fort Tarsis, not being able to set waypoints on your map, the clunky menus, and the various bugs. These aren't major setbacks, well, except for the bugs and crashes that make me lose mission progress. Still, these things can be fixed, but piled on top of an already disappointing experience makes it all that more damning. The closest experience I can compare Anthem to is my initial time with the original Destiny. But even with Destiny, even when I thought the overall experience was lackluster, the moment to moment was still enough to keep me coming back. Anthem doesn't have that. What keeps me coming back to Anthem is closer to masochism, a morbid curiosity to find out how little fun I could be having in this very moment and how much worse it could get. I don't think Anthem is very good. There's a pattern of these ongoing loot games getting better over time as they get updated, and that very well might be the case here. But Anthem's particular problems feel so fundamental to the way it was built, I think it's going to take more than a few content updates to get it to a point where it might be fun. And considering my experience with the game up to this point, by the time I'm done with it, I won't want to come back when those updates hit.